I was really excited about this conversation because I think, you know, typically the S in ESG is not talked about as much, certainly not as much as environmental and maybe even, frankly, governance. And so really excited about the opportunity to really hear from you and learn more about kind of what's working, what's not working. So I want to go ahead and get started because we don't have a whole lot of time. So according to recent reports, more than 1,100 organizations committed a total of $200 billion to racial justice initiatives between June 2020 and May 2021. To be spent over 3 to 5 years in the wake of the murder of Mr. George Floyd. From where each of you sit currently, how have you seen the S in ESG defined differently or remain the same in the last couple of years? And I'll start immediately to my left.
Yep. So first of all, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. So at Paramount, I like to say we thrive in the S. That's where we get busy. We get busy in the S. And so, you know, I've seen that companies are now moving beyond, you know, kind of surface level commitments to really digging deep and looking into what they do and deliver best, right? That's where you can have the biggest impact. For us, it's in our content. We are a content producer, a content powerhouse. We have brands that hopefully you all love, like Nickelodeon and BET and MTV and VH1 and Comedy Central and CBS, and I can go on and on. And so for us, it's been leaning into our superpower. We know that media has the ability to change minds, to change culture, to contribute to culture. And so we have a strong responsibility when it comes to that. And so we've really poured our heart into this initiative called Content for Change, which I'm happy to explain later, to really lean into who we are as an organization to be able to measure and evaluate the impact that we have.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. Devin?
Right. I guess I would say similarly, at Blackstone, our people are our most important asset, right? And so fortunately for me in the DEI space, that translates very well to trying to do the things to move the needle with respect to representation of women and people of color and LGBTQ plus employees and more. And what that looks like is, you know, some of the things that we'll talk about, but really being able to invest in looking at our systems and our processes to make sure that DEI best practices are embedded in, not just so that we can continue to bring people in, but that we are investing in programs to make sure that they are moving up throughout the organization and being successful at all levels. You know, I think one of the other things that is great, just to answer the question about what I'm seeing that's different post-Floyd, is the willingness of organizations, Blackstone included, to take head on things like racial equity and systemic barriers to inclusion in a way that we maybe haven't seen before. So that's very encouraging for me. But not just within Blackstone, we are also looking at the S and how we can invest in our people across our portfolio through programs like Career Pathways, where we're providing opportunities for our portfolio companies to grow their pipeline of talent into the organizations and up. And then similarly, looking at what impact we can have in communities that we serve through the Blackstone Charitable Foundation and our Launchpad program, which is providing opportunities to students at colleges in underserved communities with entrepreneurial skills and more, again, to make sure that they can be successful in whatever career that they choose throughout their career journey.
Great.
So, you know, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's so good to see everyone. And this conversation really is very important. And I love the way that you started it. You know, the idea that we don't speak about the S enough, I don't know if we're thinking about it correctly or framing the conversation right, because we actually are talking about the S in ESG all the time. You can't talk about sustainability, for example, without talking about communities, without talking about people. And certainly good governance requires that you have some kind of understanding and relationship with social issues. So I think as we approach the E conversations and the G conversations, let's look for those intersections. S is in the middle for a reason, because it feeds both of those other considerations. And then in terms of what I'm seeing, like sometimes I think it's easy to focus on the negative, and I prefer to focus on the positive. I am excited this conversation is happening in the first place. And so you know, we have Paramount, we have Blackstone. I come from a law firm, and so our product is a little different. We're trying to provide our clients with the best and most innovative and creative legal advice that we possibly can. And my firm is absolutely committed. The way the S emerges for us is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that we are fostering and promoting a healthy workplace. I think that ESG considerations have been with us all this time, and it really is a fiction that before ESG, people were investing from a place of neutrality. You know, I mean, that's absolutely not the case. ESG considerations have really always been with us, but I think what's changing and what's exciting is that we're thinking about these considerations the way they really finally should be thought about. They are financial considerations. These were thought of as sort of non-financial, good to have kind of considerations, but your reputation is a bottom line issue. And so again, so for us, we're really trying to, you know, where we sit is to make sure that we can give our clients correct and appropriate advice, and that we are able to attract the best talent. And again, that emerges for us in making sure that we have appropriate DEI mechanisms in place. And in some ways, you know, the way that that works, hiring is just the beginning. You know, I mean, having a diverse class of associates, that's the easy part. Yeah. Making sure that we retain people, that we train them correctly, and that we promote them is really where we're focused now. Yeah. So, and that's changed so much in the last 10 years. It used to be just getting people in the door. Now it's getting them up the ladder and making sure that they can stay.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ellen. I kind of want to start with you, kind of where you left off. I think as with when you have corporate standards, there are winners and there are losers, right? There are some people who are going to make great strides and progress in the work, and then some, frankly, will trip up. We know that you have had up close and personal experience in your legal practice with this. Can you talk to us a little bit more? I know you said you want to focus on the positive, but can you talk to us a little bit about some of the hurdles companies are having?
Absolutely. So, you know, nothing, I think, nothing's without its challenges, and things that are worth having are definitely worth fighting for. I think in this room, sort of, I look around and I see a lot of heads nodding. You know, I think we're all here with open minds and open hearts and interested in learning about these issues. But the challenge, you know, and certainly as a lawyer, I always run into people who are more than skeptical, you know, people who are opposed, people who are not just reluctant, but actually hostile. And so, you know, as a litigator, you know, that's what I do, we're really keeping our eye on ESG litigation. And so, you know, I think ESG litigation in Europe, for example, is far advanced than it is in the United States. So we have, you know, well-progressed lawsuits about climate reporting in particular. And we can look to, there's a certain amount of similarity between our legal systems. So we can look across the sea and sort of see how that's emerging and how that's working. But here in the United States, we're starting to see an emergence of anti-ESG litigation. And that's what we have to be prepared for and ready to push back against. For all of us who are excited and who see the values and the benefits of ESG investing, for all of its different criteria, there are people who are very, we can say, hostile and opposed to it. And I can give you just a few examples. You know, we're talking about a little bit about how things have changed in the wake of, you know, George Floyd's brutal murder. And many companies made pledges and said they were going to do things differently, and were going to invest money, and were going to change their workplace practices. But then you see the pushback to some of that. So just as an example, in Florida, Disney had its tax status revoked because it opposed Florida's, and frankly, completely ridiculous law about introducing children to gender diverse concepts in school and teaching that in school. So there's an active government backlash, and we'll see how that survives in the courts. We also have people who are suing what's the best way to put it, to reverse gains that people have made in higher education. And so there's a particularly cynical lawsuit that Harvard is facing now with respect to its admissions practices. So everyone has their eye on that. You know, we've been watching that very, very closely. And very recently, since in the wake of Dobbs, you know, we've had several companies, as part of their ESG initiatives, provide abortion travel services for their employees who might need those services. And we have just recently seen a Trump-appointed EEOC commissioner bring commission charges. And they're doing investigations into companies are doing that on a, frankly, very dubious legal theory that those benefits would discriminate against pregnant women and against disabled people. So yeah, there's a lot to keep our eye on. And, you know, again, I like to focus on the positive and be hopeful. If they want a challenge, they're going to get one.
Yeah, Thank you. I'm sure you're ready for this. Devin, you and I have talked about some pivots Blackstone has had to make in the social practice. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that in terms of like measuring your impact and being able to kind of change direction if you don't feel like you're getting a return on the investment?
Right. I guess picking up though on what you were saying, Ellen, where I see hope is that if we view DEI through the lens of a talent function, when we're thinking about things like how we serve our people and how we make sure that we bring the best talent in and put practices in place to move them up throughout the organization, what we find is that those best practices apply to everyone, right? And so we're thinking about widening the funnel to increase access to opportunities at Blackstone and Cadwalader and Paramount, but the bar is still the bar, right? We're still interested in hiring the best and the brightest talent that we can bring in from all kind of backgrounds and identities and so on. And so, I think just framing it in that way when we do in the face of challenges, both theoretical and real, I try to anchor myself in the talent and the focus on the people because that's much harder to push back against. In saying that, though, I'm the first person to hold this role at Blackstone, and one of the things that I have focused on is really taking a look at some of the great work that preceded me to make sure that in the wake of all of the really important energy and commitments that we've seen, particularly following the murder of George Floyd, that we are actually doing the right things, right? That we are seeing them be impactful and delivering us the talent that we need and so on. And I think, as I mentioned to you, one of the challenges that we have in this space is a reluctance to stop doing things. But it's actually necessary that within organizations and you have to stop doing what's not working. As much as this is the right thing to do, it's also a people practice, it's a business, it's being driven by real business needs, and we need to be willing to evaluate our actions with the same rigor. And a great example is just taking a look at our partnerships for our pipeline organizations and saying nothing about the really great work that these organizations are doing. We've had to take a look at, what is the return? Who are we seeing provide us with the best talent that's not only coming in, but has stayed throughout the organization? And one really great one that I'll mention is SEO, or Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. We've seen tremendous results from the impact of that partnership over time, to the point where I said, okay, they have these other really great programs, our Alternative Investment Fellows program. Let's double down on that commitment. So I think, it's not just about taking resources away, and I think part of the reason, too, that we feel reluctant to pivot is the sign that it might send in externally, right? No one wants to be seen as having their name removed from a list. But I would just caution all of us to, balance the performative from the actual successful opportunities that exist out there.
Great, thank you for that.
I could just double click on that. I also find hope in companies now being willing to not just act on instinct, but to act on impact, right? Yes. And so I know in the media space, just being able to do something as simple as to measure the diversity in front of and behind the camera, a lot of that stuff is still happening on Excel spreadsheets at companies. And so getting to the point where you have a robust infrastructure in place to be able to see where you are as an organization, to hold the mirror up to your own company and see what diversity looks like for us on show and behind the camera, is important, so that we can stop doing some of the things that aren't impactful and start doing some of the things that are really going to move the needle that we could see, in 5, 10, 20 years, maybe even 2, 3, that we've actually done something that has not only changed the physical appearance of our shows, but also the stories that are told, the narratives that are told, the authenticity of the cast, ensuring that they represent all walks, shapes, lives, and colors of this world. That all happens with who is there in the room as the shows are being written, all the way through the entire content creation lifecycle. And you don't get that if you don't have robust measurement systems. So I find hope in companies now moving from, oh, this is great, it feels good, we know we need to do it, to, oh, let's actually hold our own selves accountable in a way that is measurable, that we can then start to set targets and goals and put in our ESG reports and all those things, knowing that it's leading towards something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned this piece around storytelling and narratives, and Ellen, to your earlier point about how we're framing the conversation. So much of that depends on who, to your point, is behind the camera, right? Who's writing these scripts. Can you please tell us, Crystal, more about the Content for Change initiative, which I think is really, really special?
Sure, it's our baby right now. So post George Floyd, BET actually started it as really a social justice initiative to put, again, a stake in the ground to stand in the fact that we know that we have the ability to shape minds and culture and do more. We have, across all the brands that I mentioned earlier, a legacy of speaking to audiences and bringing up topics and issues that, quite frankly, are uncomfortable in society often. But it's a part of our legacy and who we are. That said, taking it a step further to, again, measure the impact of it and not making those content decisions based on instinct was something that we hadn't done. And so it was our next phase of that. It's looking at the content that we produce as an organization. It's looking at the creative supply chain that powers that. So to your point, the pipeline that's coming in, the people that are behind the camera, the writers, the producers, all of that good stuff. And then the culture that we breed. Yes, sure, we want to breed a diverse culture internally, but what does that look like as it connects to our talent and anyone else that's an extension of our brand, an extension of our content? And so it's kind of looking, we call it our 3 Cs, it's looking at the full ecosystem. Because when we can do it in a systemic way, that way we're in a position where we have long-term sustainable change. And so it's rooted in the research. I couldn't have preached that earlier if we're not living it, right? And so we have a lot of great studies going with our friends at Stanford and Annenberg to just, again, understand what does representation look like for us? But then it's one thing to be represented, but then what do the portrayals look like? And that's taking it to the next level, right? And so doing good on representation, big opportunity as it relates to portrayals. And so we want to make sure that that then impacts the resources that we allocate towards this, the programs that we put in place, the ones that we sunset, and the new ones that we bring on board. Because if it's not predicated in the research, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And so that, for us, is kind of like our 360 view, and something that we then last year made a commitment across our entire organization. So all of those brands have a commitment to Content for Change, and we're evaluating everything that we do.
I'm glad you mentioned the data and the research. How would you respond to criticism, and this is really for anyone, from stakeholders to say that there has not been a lot of data transparency when it comes to ESG in terms of the quality of the data, making the data just purely available? What would any of you say to that?
I have just a mischievous comment, something about that.
Do it.
I'm ready.
Yeah, which really is, a lot of companies, even before George Floyd, but certainly afterward, rushed to their social media platforms, got on TV. Anytime anyone could say it publicly, they announced that diversity was a core value of their company. So along with core values like innovation, ethical behavior, efficiency, we don't have a lot of studies about why we need ethical behavior. We don't study, we don't study, why we need to be efficient. We don't talk about why innovation is a core value. We don't have to back that up with studies at every board meeting. So if we're going to say that diversity is a core value, why do we keep having to show up with studies explaining why it's important? That's to me is my one mischievous comment. But to have a more serious comment, it is incredibly important to have this data because we do have to deal with skeptics and we do have to deal with stakeholders who aren't fully bought in. And so providing data about why it's effective, why it produces better outcomes, why it produces, really why it's a bottom line issue, I think it's much easier to convince people who are skeptical with facts and figures as opposed to sort of passionate arguments. Just point them to the data and show them how the bottom line is improving, show them how risk is being managed better. I often say this, but especially for people who are working in the financial services institutions the way that I am, the concept of diversifying your portfolio to hedge and manage risk is not at all a foreign concept. And if you can relate that to people, having a diverse group of people to work with. Because the other slightly mischievous comment I have is that people are not diverse. Groups are diverse. Okay, a single person is not diverse. A person is a person. But groups of people can be diverse, and you really have to work on that group dynamic.
Yeah.
I took, I think also slightly mischievous. Prior to joining Blackstone, I also was in the legal industry, both as a practitioner and a DEI professional. and spent a lot of time answering requests for workforce data. And I'm of two minds. There's my theory, as someone who's trying to have impact, it's super helpful for clients, again, wearing my legal professional hat, it was helpful for clients to show interest, and asking for the data is one way to do that. On the other hand, this is even before George Floyd, we saw our requests for client information go from something like maybe 25 annually to over 200 in the span of 2 years. So then I have to dedicate a resource or two to answering those requests. So the person, as one who's responsible for the outcomes, I wonder if we're striking the right balance as to why we're asking for the data, who's asking, and what you're going to do with it. Because what we tend to find is it goes out there, we spend a lot of time putting it out there, and then there's silence. And so I think there's value certainly in transparency when we're thinking about how we change minds from a change management perspective. For sure, it's helpful to provide people with data, and we know you can't improve what you're not measuring. So I think almost a better question is to ask organizations, are you leveraging analytics to inform your DEI practices? And I think universally the answer would be, or should be, yes, right? And then I think would be more comfort then too from organizations to be more transparent externally if we knew why we were being asked and what conclusions people would draw. Because there's that risk. Once you put it out there, is that good? No one's would say that they're doing amazingly well. We know that this is a journey and that it's gonna take time. But without the ability to provide that information as part of a broader conversation, I'm not sure about the long-term value in that.
I agree. I mean, data without accountability means nothing.
Yeah.
It means nothing. And so I do think, though, there needs to be a standard, to your point. The data that you're going to request needs to be connected to an action that you were going to take.
Absolutely.
Period. Otherwise, don't ask for the data. And so I just think as individuals within an organization, as leaders within an organization, and just as an industry, if you're going to put data out there, it needs to be connected to a goal that you plan to reach over a period of time. To your point, we all know this is a journey. And we all know that you need to set a North Star. That's important. And that North Star should be rooted in the data. But you have to work towards it. You have to be transparent along the way, the successes and the losses, so that you get to the point where your data is validated and you can now take it up a notch. Data should encourage you to be ambitious. Data should encourage you to step in places that feel uncomfortable as an organization because you've used it as the route to map out where you want to go.
Absolutely.
Period. Yeah. And without the data, again, earlier it was, oh, well, we don't have the data, well, we don't know. Well, we have the data now, and so what are you going to do with it? And that's what's important.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder if we have questions from the audience.
Yes, we do, in fact. We have a question. Can you address awareness and measures to correct age discrimination and the discounting around career breaks?
I think one of the things that I've been encouraged to see, over the time I've been doing this work is a willingness to think expansively about how we define diversity, right? We're having more conversations around neurodiversity and ability and the different gender or the different ages that are represented, generations is the word I was going for, generations that are represented within organizations and how they communicate differently and how we can flex our work styles and so on. And so I think what I am trying to do, and what I think a lot of my peers in this space are trying to do, is just have more of those conversations and more of that awareness around the different identities and experiences that we bring to work and how that should inform how we engage one another to create more belonging in the workplace.
I agree, and I think it goes back to your data point, right? So we have a lot of programs within our organization that get a lot of kids that are entry level, and so we realized that there was an opportunity to get young adults, that are from non-traditional backgrounds. We're specifically looking for someone that didn't go to a four-year college or university. A lot of times that could be someone that is of the older generation. But we have tons of jobs, from grips to production to writers to producers. All of that is important. And so we're using the data to try and figure out how do we balance out the entry level to the more midterm manager level to the senior levels. And create programs that cater to that. So again, it's all in the data. It's all in the data. You just have to apply it.
Great, thanks. We have another question. Tomorrow marks Latina Equal Pay Day. What are your perspectives about Latinas being the most underpaid BIPOC demographic of women, experiencing close to a 50% differential in pay?
Wants it.
I would say, say right away, it's appalling. Like that would be the first thing to say. And that I'm really happy that we are doing these days of awareness. It's really, really crucial. Statistics like that just fly over the heads of some people, and they don't really think about what it means and sort of how to correct it. And, my reaction to that always is that we have to come up with concrete plans to address it. And you have to do that through your organizations. The best way to deal with pay equity is to get your top level management involved and make sure that they are on board, that they understand what the issues are and why it's important to correct these injustices and imbalances. And then you have to, from sort of the ground up, make a concerted effort to make sure that you are identifying your candidates who are talented, who can succeed, give them the tools to do that, realize and accept without judgment that there are barriers to people's success. That's really what it is, and that moving those barriers is not necessarily the responsibility of that particular Latina. She needs the assistance of the people around her. She needs support of management. She needs a sponsor. The way that white men sponsor each other unconsciously, they've been doing that for years, we have to empower our male allies to understand that they don't necessarily have the skills to sponsor women or people of color, and give them those skills. Because there are many, many people who are on board with this and want to see change, but they don't know how to make a difference. So having gosh, I wish it would change is not enough. You need a plan. It's a plan that starts when people come in the door. It starts with the hiring process, and it has to be a path forward. And it's something that, diversity isn't something that just happens magically. It's socially constructed. And it takes a lot of effort. And just because you have a diverse class one year doesn't mean you're going to have a diverse partnership 10 years later. You have a tremendous amount of work in between. And so that's what I would say to that. That it's not just like, oh, great, it's a day, it's a day to think about these issues. It is a day to think about these issues and plan for the future.
I'm glad you mentioned future. In our last couple of minutes, I want us to take a moment to think about the future. If we are sitting here 5 years from now, what do we want to be able to say about the S in ESG? Anyone can start.
I don't know. Maybe 5 years from now, we don't have a job in ESG because it's already permeated into organizations.
And that would be a good result.
It would be a good result.
I would take it.
It would be a good result. I would say that the S is involved in every single thing that you do as an organization. That it's not just the CSR department, the ESG department, and all the other departments that are connected to the S, that it is truly embedded into who you are as an organization. And that the most important asset that you have as a company, your employees, feel a connection to the success of the S. It shouldn't just be a department. It's everyone's success, right? And that's one of all of the E and the G. The S to me is one that everyone can get behind across the lifespan of an organization and feel personally and professionally connected to the role that they play in the S. So that's my hope, is that we have more allies across organizations to really move the needle forward, especially as we're talking about pipelining and everything else.
Yeah, and I guess as you say, ally, one of the ally behaviors is just a commitment to continued education, right?
Yeah.
To staying the course. And when I think about 5 years from now, I really hope that we're continuing to stay the course, right? I'm a little bit more of a cynic. I think we'll still be talking about this, but I don't think that's a bad thing, because even in a perfect world, if we do have, all of our organizations reflect the communities and the people that we serve, we're still going to have to focus on principles of equity and inclusion and making sure that the outcomes, match our intentions. And so I'd just love to see a sustained conversation around these issues and more comfort being uncomfortable in the workplace, talking about things like generational differences and sexual orientation or neurodivergence and so on.
Just very briefly, I would like to say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I want to see, to Crystal's point, the need for these conversations as we're having them as a matter of urgency, to change, you know, and to become more conversations of how do we get better and better and better at this. Like, that's what I'm looking forward to. And when I retire, being able to sort of listen to younger people saying, are you kidding? There weren't women on boards? Like, I mean, that would be, that would be terrific.
Wonderful.